Hello, it's Monday morning, it's 6 o'clock, it's a brand new week and we've got a warm welcome for you from Birmingham News. I'm here with you every Monday morning to take a look around our area of Birmingham, the West Midlands and beyond. Yes, it's Monday the 24th of April and coming up on this morning's show, we'll take a look at what's on this week's community notice board. Carl Jones will bring us his weekly business update and we'll remind ourselves what's been going on around our area. Later on in the programme, Carl will be here to tell us what's happening in the world of the silver screen. Johnny Doom will have his pick of the gigs and Steve Green and Jason Forrest will join us with their guests. Plus Norma Bartlam will tell us what's so special about this month. We might even have a repeat of those Easter egg jokes from last week. Anyway, welcome to your start of the week edition of Birmingham News. Welcome back to the programme with me, Lee Bannister. Now, Carl Jones will be back again shortly for his regular weekend look at the silver screen. Now then, you might remember last week our reporter Steve Green discussed the Midlands punk, rock and heavy metal scenes with Joe Dempster, who's the lead guitarist with the horror-themed band The Bloodthirsters. Well, this week Steve and Joe are talking about why it's often best to leave in a few rough edges and also the kind of horror movies which have influenced Joe's music.
It does distance you more and more from the actual music if you do it in various sections rather than playing all together as a group. You are, one person's doing the vocals, one person's doing the drums, maybe on different days.
Yeah. In
some cases on different continents. It's just crazy if you're actually there and actually have the energy of performing that one piece that one day.
Well, exactly. I mean, and this is kind of the main point, from the perspective of coming up with a tight track, everybody tracking their parts individually is better, but it very often lacks the raw energy of literally everyone getting into the studio. You have the drums going, you have the bass pounding, and you just don't get that when you're just all recording individual parts.
Certainly. I mean, as I mentioned to you earlier, there's an album that's just been released time with the TV series, The Man in the High Castle. It's called Resistance Radio.
Yeah. And
it's set in an alternative 1963 where the Germans and the Japanese won the Second World War. And it's actually dark versions of early 1960 songs. And the producers have deliberately gone for a 1963 style of production. They won't do anything in there that wasn't already available in 1963 or even in the late 1950s. I mean, that's going back to basics, essentially.
Absolutely, and I think ultimately a lot of the great music that came in the 1960s was exactly for kind of this reason. It was a time of great social revolution. You had Woodstock, and obviously the hippies were around at that time.
Martin Luther King,
precisely.
John Kennedy, Robert Kennedy.
Exactly, and this is the key point. But you wouldn't have had that energy. Let's say we were taking modern production techniques and playing the song, you would get effectively a completely different sound. You could argue that it's a technically better sound, but would it have the energy?
Well, it take a lot of life out of things to make them too technically perfect. I really enjoy, for instance, the raw energy of Michelle Schott's first album,
yes.
Campfire Songs, which was recorded essentially on a standard reel-to-reel tape recorder in the middle of a desert. Or Nebraska, Bruce Springsteen's album, which was recorded in his garage, and again on a standard tape recorder.
Yeah.
And who can forget the early days of punk when they used to release stuff on little floppy disks, and they'd actually recorded that day and get it out pretty much the next day, for people to buy at the next concert.
Absolutely, and very often they would literally have magazines where you'd have sections when it comes to playing guitar that would say, here's one chord, here's a second chord, here's a third chord, now go and form a band. And and that's in a way, this is kind of, I think that everybody has the potential for expression, and I think punk's an excellent way to kind of get that expressive energy into music.
Well, it's certainly, and obviously the horror has got a similar tradition of being fairly punk, fairly low grade, people just thinking, we can put together a movie.
Yeah.
So there's a kind of parallel there, which is probably why it runs nicely with the sort of music you do. Tell me, what sort of horror are you into, horror cinema?
I like quite a bit of 60s and 70s horror films. Like, for instance, what I've been interested in is, I don't know if you've heard of a film called The Uncanny.
Yes, very much so.
That's an excellent film. Nobody I've spoken to's heard of it, but obviously the plot's basically about an author who's basically convinced that there's a conspiracy by cats.
Yes,
and ironically,
Ray Land, if I recall.
Yes, and obviously in the end, well, I'm not going to say that because I don't want to spoil it for anyone who hasn't seen the film, but I think we can guess the direction the film goes.
Yes, there are some wonderful 1960s films which take weird ideas but make them really powerful.
Yeah.
Because there aren't massive special effects.
Exactly, and the thing is, I also very much like films that, take something quite innocent and films that are a bit tongue-in-cheek. I mean, if we look at something like The Wicker Man, let's be honest, there are parts of that that are almost like a musical when they're all in the bar singing The Landlord's Daughter,
Ah, yes.
Bits of it are almost kind of, as you'd expect a musical to be.
Giovanni's soundtrack for that was eventually released as an album.
Yes.
And it is quite a wonderful piece of work, also as a document of early British folklore music.
Absolutely.
Folk music, because it keeps the tradition. I mean, The Landlord's Daughter, I think John Barleycorn. There were loads of old songs built in there. And it's got a very sinister theme, of course, as well.
Of course, I mean, and I believe that the last scene when Edward Woodward's being burned in The Wicker Man,
For those of the people who haven't seen that film, that came out in 1973.
Yeah, of course. But there's a song at the end of that called Summer Is A-Coming, which I believe was the actual first notated folk song.
Yes.
To my understanding.
It certainly goes back, centuries.
Yeah.
And next week, in the final part of this interview, Joe will be telling Steve how mixing radically different musical styles can have surprising and exciting results. Anyway, that's all we've got time for this morning from Birmingham News. I'll be back with you at 1 o'clock with your lunchtime update. And then Mike Prince will be back this week at 6 and 9 with the latest for Birmingham and the West Midlands. Coming up next is the best bits from last week in the Lowdown. So from the whole team here at Made in Birmingham, thank you for watching. I'll see you later.